During a $75,000 deal, my partner said, "I'm cutting you out." I exposed his lies. He lost everything overnight. Story 1. I didn't think I'd ever post something like this, but after what happened, I need to get this off my chest. I still feel the anger boiling in me whenever I think about it. I was betrayed by someone I trusted, a business partner, and it almost cost me everything. Almost. I'm Alaric, 43, and I live in Albany, New York now, but this all started in Chicago a few years back. I was working in property restoration, fixing up old homes, flipping them, and moving on to the next project. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and I was good at it. I took pride in taking wrecked buildings and turning them into something beautiful again. That's where Ruben came in. He was 38, smooth talking, always dressed like he was about to pitch something to a room full of investors. He had this energy about him, like he could sell ice in a blizzard. We met at a real estate networking event. He said he was looking for someone with hands-on experience, someone who could get projects done while he handled the business side. It sounded perfect. I'd be the guy on the ground, and he'd deal with investors, permits, and sales. We shook hands and got to work. Our first project went okay. It was a small fixer-upper in a not-so-great neighborhood. I did most of the heavy lifting, literally, while Ruben spent his time networking. We split the profits 60-40, with him taking the bigger share. He said it was because he was the one bringing in the money, the clients, and the connections. I didn't like it, but I let it go. I was just happy to have steady work and someone who seemed to know what he was doing. Then came the brownstone. It was a 3-story beauty from the early 1900s, sitting just outside Chicago's Gold Coast. The place was a disaster, peeling paint, rotted floors, broken windows, but I could see the potential. Ruben was thrilled when we got it for $175,000 at auction. He told me he already had a buyer lined up, someone willing to pay $300,000 once we fixed it up. That meant a $75,000 profit, split between us. It sounded like a dream. I threw myself into the project. For 6 months, I worked non-stop. I spent mornings dealing with contractors and afternoons doing the work myself to save costs. I refinished floors, rebuilt staircases, installed kitchen cabinets, and even replaced the plumbing in the basement. Every inch of that house had my sweat in it. And Ruben? He showed up maybe once a week, if that. He'd waltz in, take a few pictures for his Instagram, and complain about how slow the work was going. Then he'd disappear again, probably to one of his fancy investor lunches. I started to resent him, but I kept my mouth shut. He was the one handling the buyer, the paperwork, the money. I trusted him. That was my mistake. The day of the sale finally came. We met at a small law office downtown to sign the papers and finalize the deal. The buyer, Ms. Eldridge, was a sharp, no-nonsense real estate developer. Ruben was all charm and smiles, playing the confident businessman. I sat quietly, tired but excited. After months of hard work, we were about to close the deal. When it came time to sign, Ruben leaned back in his chair and said something that still makes my blood boil. "Oh, actually, Alaric won't be signing anything today," he said with that fake, polished smile. "He's not part of the deal." I stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" Ruben turned to Ms. Eldridge, still smiling. "Alaric's just my contractor. He's been helping with the renovations. But the property, and the sale, are in my name." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Contractor? I'm your partner. We're supposed to split the profits." Ruben laughed, a short, dismissive laugh. "Come on, don't make this awkward. You were paid for your work. This is my deal." I felt the air leave the room. Ms. Eldridge looked at me, then at Ruben. "Is this true?" she asked. "No," I said firmly. "We're partners. I've been working on this house for 6 months, and we agreed to split the profits." Ruben's smile vanished. His voice turned cold. "We never had a formal agreement. I appreciate your help, but the deal is mine." I was stunned. My hands were shaking. I looked at Ms. Eldridge, hoping she'd say something, but she just sat there, silent. It wasn't her fight. She had no reason to step in. I left the office that day in a fog. Months of work, thousands of dollars of my own money spent, and Ruben was walking away with everything. I felt sick. I felt stupid. How could I have been so blind? But then something clicked. Anger replaced the shock. If Ruben thought he could screw me over and walk away clean, he was dead wrong. I went home and started gathering every scrap of evidence I had. Emails, text messages, invoices, receipts, everything. I had dozens of messages where Ruben referred to me as his partner. I had proof of the money I spent on materials and labor. I even had photos of us at the property together, with Ruben holding tools he probably didn't even know how to use. And then, I reached out to Ms. Eldridge. I didn't know if she'd care, but I sent her everything. I wrote her an email explaining the situation and attached all the evidence. I didn't expect much, but at least I'd have my side of the story on record. 2 hours later, she called me. "I don't tolerate liars," she said. "Leave this with me." I had no idea what she planned to do, but I felt a small glimmer of hope. That's when I decided to take things a step further. Ruben's whole life revolved around his reputation. He loved being the guy everyone looked up to, the self-made entrepreneur with all the answers. So, I decided to make sure everyone knew the truth. I went to a local real estate forum where Ruben was active and posted my story. I included all the evidence, the emails, the texts, the receipts. I wrote everything out, start to finish, leaving nothing out. I didn't even have to name him. Anyone in the industry could figure out who I was talking about. The response was immediate. People started commenting, sharing their own stories about Ruben. Turns out, I wasn't the first person he'd screwed over. Contractors, investors, even old business partners, all of them had something to say. Ruben's name became poison overnight. But the best part? Ms. Eldridge came through. She put the deal on hold, citing unethical practices, and forwarded my evidence to her legal team. Without her backing, Ruben was left scrambling to find another buyer. Ruben didn't just lose the deal that day. Ms. Eldridge's legal team was thorough. They dug into everything, his paperwork, his contracts, and his so-called network. Within a week, it all started unraveling. Turns out, Ruben had been cutting corners not just with me, but with investors, lenders, and even the contractors he'd hired in past projects. Ms. Eldridge made sure everyone knew what kind of person they were dealing with. She reached out to some of his investors, sharing the evidence I gave her. Word spread like wildfire. Suddenly, the people who had trusted him with their money were pulling out of his future deals. Without that money, he had no way to pay off the loans he'd taken for the brownstone renovation. But my fight wasn't over yet. I took my evidence to a lawyer, someone recommended by a friend in the real estate world. He was sharp and didn't mince words. "This is a solid case," he told me. "You've got proof that you were a partner. If what you're telling me is true, we can not only get you your share but damages too." We filed a lawsuit. It was a long process, and Ruben tried everything to worm his way out of it. He claimed I was lying, that I was just a bitter contractor trying to ruin his reputation. But the evidence was undeniable. Emails where he called me his partner, receipts in my name for materials I paid for, and even text messages where we discussed the profit split. He couldn't argue against it. During the court proceedings, things got even worse for him. His financial records came out, and they showed just how messy his business dealings really were. He had been juggling investor money between projects, using funds from one to pay off debts from another. When the judge saw the evidence, he ruled in my favor. I was awarded my share of the $75,000 profit, and then some. Ruben was ordered to pay me damages for the money I'd spent out of pocket, plus compensation for lost time and labor. The total amount? Just over $100,000. Ruben didn't have that kind of money. The brownstone had already gone back on the market, but it sold at a loss. He barely broke even, and the court slapped a lien on his future earnings to ensure I'd get every penny he owed me. But here's the part that still makes me smile. Ruben had been working hard to build up his reputation as a real estate mogul. His name was everything to him. After my post on the forum, and after Ms. Eldridge's connections started talking, his reputation was destroyed. Nobody in the Chicago real estate world would work with him. Investors dropped him like a bad habit. Even contractors refused to take his calls. And then, I found out he had to sell his car, a brand new BMW he'd been flaunting on social media, to cover his immediate debts. He moved back to his parents' place in Milwaukee, completely broke and humiliated. The guy who once bragged about being the future of real estate was now living in his childhood bedroom. Meanwhile, I moved on. I took the money I won and invested it in my own projects. No partners, no middlemen, just me and a solid team of contractors I could trust. My business has been thriving ever since. The best part? Every now and then, I hear a whisper about Ruben. He's tried to start over in different cities, but his reputation follows him. People Google his name, and they find the stories about how he tried to screw over his partner, how he lost everything because of his greed. Ruben wanted to cut me out of a $75,000 deal. Instead, he cut himself out of an entire career. And I made sure he'd never forget it. Story 2. This happened a few years ago, and it's still the craziest thing I've ever been through. Even now, thinking about it feels surreal. At the time, I just wanted to keep my job, but somehow, I ended up flipping the whole situation on its head. I've worked at this logistics company for over a decade. It's nothing fancy, just your typical office job. I handled scheduling, managing shipments, and making sure everything ran smoothly. I'm Marlo, by the way. Not that my name matters much, but it's part of the story. I'm in my 40s, raising 2 kids on my own, and every paycheck matters. I'm not the type to rock the boat. I keep my head down, do my work, and avoid drama. That's just how I was raised. Victor, though. Victor brought drama wherever he went. He was hired as our manager a few years ago. From the moment he walked in, he acted like he owned the place. He was tall, well-dressed, and had that overconfident air of someone who thinks they're smarter than everyone else in the room. At first, he seemed nice enough. He made jokes, asked people about their weekends, and tried to come off as approachable. I actually liked him in the beginning. He didn't micromanage, and that was enough for me. Then Serafina showed up. Victor had been with the company for maybe 6 months when he announced he was hiring a new administrative assistant. We already had an admin, Denise, who'd been with the company for years. Denise was efficient, knew the ins and outs of the job, and didn't cause any problems. But according to Victor, the workload's getting too heavy, and he needed more support. None of us bought it, but hey, it wasn't our call. Serafina walked into the office like she owned the place. She was young, probably late 20s, with long hair and a designer purse that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent. She didn't have a background in logistics or admin work. Victor said something vague about transferable skills. Fine, whatever, I didn't care who he hired. As long as my paycheck kept coming, it wasn't my problem. But then it became my problem. A few weeks after Serafina started, I noticed my hours got cut. At first, it was just a few hours here and there, but then it became consistent. I went from working 40 hours a week to 32, then 28. When I asked Victor what was going on, he brushed me off with some nonsense about budget cuts. I didn't want to make waves, so I let it go. But it stung. I've been with this company for over a decade, and suddenly I'm the one getting my hours slashed? Meanwhile, Serafina was getting overtime. She wasn't subtle about it, either. She'd be in Victor's office late at night, giggling loud enough for the whole floor to hear. They'd take long lunches together, come back smelling like they'd bathed in perfume and cologne, and she started showing up to work in designer clothes that definitely weren't in her price range. I'm not one to judge how someone spends their money, but when your salary's coming out of my hours, yeah, I'm going to notice. The favoritism was obvious to everyone. Victor praised Serafina constantly in meetings, even though her work was sloppy at best. She'd mess up schedules, forget to send invoices, and somehow it was always someone else's fault. If I made a single mistake, though, Victor was on me like a hawk. The double standard was exhausting. Things got worse when Victor called me into his office one day. He didn't waste time sugarcoating it. He told me my hours were being cut again because Serafina's role is evolving, and she's just a better fit for the team's direction. I felt my jaw tighten. A better fit? For what? She barely knew what she was doing, and now I was supposed to lose even more hours so she could expand her role? It was ridiculous. I kept my cool in the moment, but inside, I was boiling. When I got home that night, I vented to my best friend, Ria. She listened quietly, then said, "Marlo, start documenting everything. Keep track of every shady thing he does. If he's screwing around with company resources, HR will want proof." I didn't love the idea of getting involved in office drama, but Ria was right. I couldn't afford to lose my job, and if Victor kept cutting my hours, I'd be forced to quit. So I started paying attention. And boy, was there a lot to pay attention to. Victor and Serafina weren't exactly subtle. They'd disappear into his office for hours at a time, go on business lunches that lasted all afternoon, and leave together after work almost every day. One time, I overheard Victor on the phone with his wife, lying about having to work late while Serafina was still in his office. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. The more I watched, the more I realized it wasn't just an affair. Serafina was being paid more than anyone in her position had ever been. I found out through a friend in accounting that she was making almost double what Denise had made, and Denise had actually been qualified for the job. It made me sick. My hours, and probably the hours of other employees, were being cut to fund their little affair. I started keeping a folder of evidence. Emails where Victor praised Serafina for things she didn't do, notes about the times they left work together, and even screenshots of her social media posts. She wasn't shy about flaunting her new lifestyle. Fancy dinners, expensive handbags, weekend trips to Chicago, all while I was struggling to make ends meet. I didn't know exactly what I'd do with the evidence yet, but I figured it'd come in handy eventually. The tipping point came during the company holiday party. It was held at a fancy event space downtown, the kind with chandeliers and overpriced appetizers. Everyone was in high spirits, and Victor was drinking more than usual. Serafina, of course, was glued to his side. At one point, I saw them sneak out the side door together. My gut told me to follow. I found them in the parking lot. They were kissing, completely oblivious to the fact that anyone could see them. I didn't say anything, I just snapped a photo with my phone and walked back inside. My hands were shaking. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with the photo, but it felt like the last piece of the puzzle. The next day, I sent an anonymous email to HR. I included everything: the photo, the emails, the notes, and a detailed timeline of their behavior. I wasn't sure if they'd take it seriously, but I figured it was worth a shot. What happened next was beyond anything I could have imagined. HR didn't waste time. Within days of my email, they launched an investigation. At first, it was subtle, Questions here and there, requests for expense reports. Victor didn't seem to realize what was happening. He carried on like nothing was wrong, still parading Serafina around the office like she was some kind of prize. But as the weeks went on, the tension started to build. I kept my head down and acted like I didn't notice. Inside, I was practically vibrating with anticipation. Every time HR pulled someone into their office, I knew they were getting closer to the truth. Victor and Serafina, though? They were oblivious. They probably thought they were untouchable. Then came the day everything fell apart. It started with an email from HR announcing an all-staff meeting. Meetings like this were rare, so everyone knew it was serious. We all gathered in the conference room, and the head of HR stood at the front, her face unreadable. She started by thanking everyone for their cooperation during a recent investigation. Then, without naming names, she explained that serious misconduct had been discovered, including inappropriate use of company funds and violations of the company's code of conduct. She said 2 employees had been terminated, effective immediately. As soon as she said it, we all knew who she was talking about. Victor and Serafina weren't in the meeting. They'd been escorted out of the building earlier that morning. Apparently, the evidence I provided had been the final nail in the coffin. HR found proof that Victor had been using company funds to pay for their business lunches, hotel stays, and even some of Serafina's designer purchases. On top of that, the investigation confirmed their relationship, which violated company policies. But the best part? The fallout didn't end there. Victor's wife found out about the affair, not through me, but because HR reported the misconduct to the company's legal team, and it all came out in the process. She filed for divorce and got half of everything, including their house. Victor was left scrambling to find a new job while living in a tiny apartment. Serafina? Last I heard, she moved back in with her parents after struggling to find work. Turns out transferable skills don't mean much when your reputation is trashed. As for me, things took a surprising turn. After Victor's firing, the company needed someone to step in as interim manager while they searched for a permanent replacement. To my shock, they offered me the role. I wasn't sure if I wanted it at first. I'd always been more comfortable working behind the scenes, but it felt too good to pass up. I accepted, thinking it'd be temporary. Well, it wasn't. A few months later, after seeing how well I was doing, the company made it official. I was promoted to manager, with a raise and full benefits. My new office was, ironically, Victor's old one. Cleaning out his desk was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. I tossed his tacky motivational posters in the trash and replaced them with photos of my kids. Every time I closed the door to that office, I felt a quiet sense of victory. The team was thrilled with the change. Without Victor's favoritism and Serafina's incompetence dragging everyone down, morale skyrocketed. People started working together better, and productivity improved. It felt good to see the office thriving again. And me? For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The extra income made a huge difference for my family, and I finally had the confidence to stand up for myself when it mattered. I even took Ria out for dinner to celebrate, on my dime, not the company's. Looking back, I don't regret a thing. Victor thought he could walk all over people and get away with it. Serafina thought she could take what wasn't hers without consequences. They both underestimated me. Sometimes, karma needs a little push. And when it does, you better believe I'm the one doing the pushing.